Hi everybody, going to take a quick minute here to walk through this presentation about functions and events in JavaScript. You can see the link to the replit that has the code I'm using in here. Feel free to check that out. So, the big goal for this presentation is to respond when the user clicks a button. A few things we need to do that. We need to be able to create functions, and we need to react to a user's click, which means we need to understand what functions and events are. Let's start with functions. A function is any block of code that can be called by name. We have to create that function and we have to later on give it a call. There are a few exceptions to this idea, but that's the plain one. All right, so the syntax for creating a function looks like this. Function add paragraph 1, parentheses, curly brace. What's going on there? Well, we've got the keyword function. That tells JavaScript this is declaring a function. It's going to create a new function. We name the function. You can name it following basically the same rules that we use for variables. It can use underscores, letters, numbers. It can't start with a number. And as a general rule, we don't capitalize the first letter of it. We follow that up with parentheses. Those can hold more information. Right now they're empty. They do have to be there for every function declaration. And then we have the left curly brace to open the block of code. Following that line, you get all your code that you want to run when that gets called, and then at the end we close it with that right curly brace. Timing of functions. Functions only run when they're called. If your code only has functions, then it does nothing. So we create the function. It's kind of like a play in football or basketball. You draw up the play over on the sidelines, but that doesn't mean that anything happens on the court. Once you're on the court, somebody calls that play. Unless what's happened is your coach has said, hey, as soon as you go out there, run this play, right? So you can do that in JavaScript too, and we'll learn how to do that to make a function run the moment the page loads. But the basic rule is functions only run when they're called, and if your code only has function declarations, So here's the syntax for calling a function. We give the name of the function, add paragraph 1, parentheses, might have more information in there, and then a semicolon. So the name of the function to run, the parentheses, which may hold more later, and a semicolon. I get rid of those arrows so you can see that semicolon one more time. Okay? And we've done that before. We did it when we used alerts. The parentheses held more information, in this case a string that we wanted it to throw up into that alert box, followed by a semicolon. We did it with console.log. So the log is the function, console is the object essentially that we're pulling from. We'll learn more about that later. Hello is what we want it to, and then the semicolon. We also did it when we said something like this, var answer equals prompt, how's your day? Again, we've got a string because prompt also wants a string to decide what it should say. And notice that this one uses the function prompt as an expression and assigns its results to a variable. So whatever you've typed in, once it says prompt, gets assigned to that answer variable. You can do that with your own functions too. We'll learn that later on. So, quick short version reminder of what an expression is. An expression is any collection of code that resolves to a value like a number or a string. And we see here prompt, we know, results in a string because you can type in any set of characters you want. So that takes care of creating functions. Next up, we're going to talk about reacting to a user's click. So an event, this is the next piece of vocabulary. An event is a thing that happens to HTML elements that JavaScript can react to. Some examples: on change, means that something has changed about that element, maybe the contents of it. On click, this is probably the most common one, and it's the one we're going to use today, and that is that the user clicks an HTML element. We'll deal more with most of those. The last one we'll use pretty soon, onload. You can do window.onload and apply the function to that, and that will make it so the function runs once everything is loaded into the page, so you know everything's there. We use that one a lot too, but for today, we're going to use onClick. So to react to a user's click, we're going to use the most direct method today, There are a few ways to make this happen, but this is the one we're going to use today. We're going to apply an attribute to an HTML tag like this. I've got a span here that says P1, and I've got the attribute onClick, which is the event we want to respond to, and we want to run a function called addParagraph1. And that takes care of calling it when we click on that P1. So style tips for buttons. When we make a button on a page, we want to be consistent with how that's going to look. And we want to use some hover effects so that the user knows that this is a live element that can do something when I click on it. So better than saying, click on this button, we'd rather use our styling to make that work. So we can change colors, and we can add that cursor pointer, which will change the what the cursor looks like when you hover over it. So here's a sample style for elements with the class button. You see I've added that class equals button attribute up here. And in here I've got, first I style up the button. Display inline block, that keeps it so it's going side by side, as a span item does, but it gives it some of the features of a block element. I want the text to be white and the background to be black. I've got a sans serif font in this case, and I'm making it a little smaller than normal at 0.8 EM. REM might have been better there. I'm giving it a little bit of padding so it's not right up against the edges of that black background. A margin of 3 pixels. I want it to separate from other buttons so it's really clear that it is its own thing. I'm going to start with a 1 pixel solid black border. Since my background is black, you're not going to see that. Later on, I'm going to change that color, and then we will see it, and no sizes will change. And then I'm going to put a transition on there so that there's just 1/3 of a second for colors to change. When they hover over the button, I'm going to change that text color to yellow, leave that background color black, so I don't even need that, but I change that border color to yellow and make the cursor into a pointer. And here's the results of that. So when we hover over, we see that one, they're separated from other things. They all look basically the same in style, even though they say different things. And when we hover over it, the text turns yellow, the border turns yellow, and that cursor changes into that hand. So when you run into it, you know instinctively this is something I can click on. So that's a good way to do it. Okay, so quick review. We create the function like this, function addParagraph1, okay? And then we put all the code inside after that, all the lines of code. It can be one. You can just say alert, and then in parentheses put a quote, I ran this function. And then at the end you close it with a curly brace. And then we call it with the name of the function followed by the parentheses and the semicolon. And we can put that into a user's click, to have it react to a user's click by adding that onClick attribute to an element and setting it equal to, and then in quotes, the function to run, that function call. Okay. So let's take a quick hop over to Replit to see what that looks like. Okay, so in my script file, I've got a function here, addParagraph1. When I do that, we'll talk a little bit next time about what I'm doing in here. I actually grab that element P with the ID of P1 and change it to say, and here's a paragraph, it sits beneath a heading, and so on. Okay, and I've got that closing curly brace here. So this is the function. It does nothing when I first load, but it's sitting there ready. In my HTML page, I have that button classed span that just says P1, and the onClick is addParagraph1. Okay, so this button calls this function. If I go and look at it, let's go ahead and pop this out to a new page. There we go. I've got some other stuff sitting in there. Pop it out to a new page, and I've got P1, P2, P3. We see that I hover over those. When I click P1, it creates the new contents for that paragraph. It doesn't create any new objects. Later on, we'll learn how to do things like this. Create new objects, okay, that weren't on the page before, and how to clear them. So what I would like you to do is to give it a try. Create a function that does something, even if it's just an alert. Create an element that will run that function when it's clicked. Give it a class that makes sense. You can even use class equals button, and give it your own button style. Okay? Thanks, everybody.